Hi, my name is Kaylin Wheeler, and today I'm going to be teaching my lesson plan on hegemony and Sign+Referent. So starting off with hegemony, by definition, hegemony is the act of one dominant social group gaining and maintaining power over another social group through shared beliefs, values, morals, ideals, and in a way that almost becomes commonsensical. So hegemony is embedded in our everyday lives and showcases how power isn't imposed or enforced through violence, but it's actually learned and lived and believed. It changes our understanding of power, of culture, of identity, of American ideals, and helps us understand the contradictive power structures that are present in American government. So why does hegemony matter? I guess you could answer this question by asking another question, which is, how do people come to accept certain arrangements of power as normal or fair in the first place? Hegemony allows for our societies to again see how power isn't enforced by laws or violence. It also helps explain how inequalities and social hierarchies can exist in this American government that values freedom and individuality and equality so much. And hegemony is the explanation for why we as a society consent to these systems that actually disadvantage us, and how we subconsciously abide by the rules that are set for us without even questioning them. And without this concept, it's hard to understand why there isn't a constant resistance in our society, considering that there are so many inequalities, whether that's racial gaps, gender inequalities, class gaps, yet we never question the system. So let's talk a little bit about how hegemony shapes identity. So hegemony helps us see that all of the ways that we choose to identify ourselves, race, gender, class, nationality, these are actually not personal forms of identification. It is socially constructed within the American government for us to use these boxes to try to describe ourselves. It has nothing to do with our individuality, yet it's portrayed to seem as if that is our own individuality. For instance, whiteness is considered the dominant narrative. They are the norm, and we all just abide by these norms without even questioning why. Same with masculinity being seen as the authority gender or the leader gender over women. The same way that the middle class lifestyle is treated as the standard, and again, we as a society all abide by these norms and are influenced by what we see in the media pertaining to these things. And hegemony allows for us to think that these patterns are natural or commonsensical, when in reality it's socially produced and embedded into our government. Let's talk about how hegemony shapes culture. So culture and identity are deeply tied to power, and I feel like to understand this ideal a little better, we need to know that culture is the analysis of meaning, language, and representation. And culture happens to be the main vehicle for hegemony. We as a society love media, entertainment services, advertisements, and popular culture. And these are the main forms that hegemony circulates. They often show us ideals of success, beauty, morality, national identity, when it's actually just enforcers of the dominant narrative and the dominant norms that are set for us and that we're encouraged to follow. So let's talk a little bit now about referent and sign. So by definition, referent is an object. It's an object, a thing, a concept, an item. It is a sole thing that doesn't hold any sort of meaning, but the sign is the meaning that we attach to that object. And then to just have a little extra background information, representation means how something is portrayed. So the referent itself is just an item. It doesn't have any type of meaning. It is just that object. But the sign is the cultural meaning that object evokes. And that meaning is shaped by hegemony and can change depending on the cultural context, the social context, the class context, wherever it happens to take place. So let's do a little learning activity. Can you tell me what you see in this image?
Gray sweatshirt.
Okay. Does that hold any type of meaning to you at all? No, it's just a gray sweatshirt. Does the meaning of that sweatshirt change once you see it on a white model? Now, does the meaning of it change when it's now a black man wearing the gray hoodie showcasing a rapper on the front of it in like a hood background?
More hip hop.
It changes. So that was just an example of how the referent itself is the hoodie. It is just a simple hoodie, men's hoodie made of gray cloth material meant to keep you warm. It carries no meaning by itself. But once you change whose body it's on, it now changes the meaning of it by racial stereotypes, the context it's put in, the media framing, the thought process on what is normal or what is expected from each of the models from white to black changes. And this is all due to the dominant narrative that is enforced on our society. And it's just a prime example of how hegemony affects our everyday thought processes and how the object itself doesn't construct any meaning, but it is the cultural context and the ideals that are evoked from that object depending on where it is. So let's just connect this back to some course concepts. So again, culture is made up of signs, not objects. It's made up of meaning, of ideals, of things that are evoked from those objects, not just the objects themselves. And meaning is shaped by power, history, and cultural context. And what feels natural to us or commonsensical is actually constructed into us and we just don't realize it. One point I would like to emphasize is how media controls how those signs are circulated and interpreted, and then from that interpretation, the media affects how that's translated to other people. So how hegemony and referent plus sign connect to one another is hegemony essentially works through those signs that we just talked about. So again, a referent doesn't come with a fixed meaning, but it becomes meaningful once society attaches a sign to it. And then hegemony influences which of those signs become the dominant narrative or the more correct, natural narrative for society to abide by. Again, hegemony doesn't just control people through force, it controls how we interpret symbols and signs, what we believe to be normal, and what ideals in American culture we don't even question, and which systems that we don't even question. So for example, let's use law enforcement. So the referent is the police. They're simply just enforcers of laws. But one possible sign from one social group could be that they promote safety, authority, help. That's what they do. Another possible sign from a different, probably a minority group, they would say they promote violence, inequality, abuse of power. There's multiple signs that can be evoked from the same referent. It just depends on the context. So again, hegemony promotes that dominant narrative of law enforcement equaling safety is the commonsensical answer. It's the answer that most people will say. It's the answer that the government wants us to believe. But again, we live in a world of contradictives, and there are clear racial inequalities throughout all of America, especially involving law enforcement, but hegemony again pushes that dominant narrative of it equaling safety. So now that we've wrapped up our lesson, I'm gonna ask you 4 questions, and I'm gonna have you write them down and then turn into me your answers. The first one being, can you describe the difference between a referent and the sign? The next one being, choose any everyday object and identify what is a referent and what is a sign. And then I'm gonna have you describe how does hegemony shape meaning, And then ask the question of, can a single referent have more than one sign? Explain why or why not.